Something interesting for you today, because this, I thought, should we add this to the conservative what went wrong series? And certainly it deserves, a place in that list. But it's the person who is writing this, I think, that is probably the most telling on this. I've mentioned a couple of times before about a website called Unheard, and I've said this before, but Unheard makes some of the comedy stuff that we have seen on conservative home look comparatively sane and sensible. Because right now, every single story on that website is how Donald Trump is an absolute martyr, how his win from this is absolutely guaranteed because Trump totally has no problems at all whatsoever that he has to deal with. Again, I keep on emphasizing that Donald Trump has a lot of problems he's got to deal with. Most importantly, the fact that three very important Republican associations in 3 of the 5 swing states that Donald Trump has to win are bankrupt. So, they're very vexatiously waxing lyrical, shall we say. I wanted to use another term of phrase about how wonderful and martyric, this guy is. But one of the reasons why we're doing this is, more importantly, is Peter Franklin, the guy who's just writing this, and he's like one of the editors over at Unheard. In the upcoming conservative civil war, there will be, and I can guarantee it, there will be a conservative youth faction form. I know, conservative youth faction form. But trust me, they will form. How much influence they will have is debatable, but they will certainly have a voice in the upcoming fight or upcoming conservative civil war that is about to happen. In fact, something Peter Franklin actually mentions in this article, that they are going to go into a civil war. But more interestingly enough, is that this is Peter Franklin, who, bear in mind, never been an MP, purely a political pundit, examines the past leaders that they have had. So this is an interesting look into what this youth conservative, even popular conservative, I know he's a popcorn, shock horror, actually thinks of the last couple of leaders. And it's a very interesting look at, and we're going to focus on what he thinks of those last leaders in particular. But before we get to that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page, the One Off Nation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there is the Pony Club today. And of course, remember, 'tis Wednesday. So for those of you on the Patreon, on the Pony Club as well, there will be a new video out for you today as well. So watch out for that. And of course, as always, let's crack on then into this and get started. So here we are, off over onto conservative home with Peter Franklin's article, Who is to Blame for the Worst Defeat in Our History? All our leaders must share in the dishonor. So he has a bit of a preamble, but one of the things I really want to point out is we, meaning the survivors of the impending civil war, might eventually even arrive at a shared understanding of what went so horribly wrong. And bear in mind, throughout all these articles, you will have seen there is no real one solid consensus. Even when it looks like they're agreeing on some things, their, shall we say, interpretation of those things vastly different. But we'll see what we have, because like I say, he's going through all the leaders. So first of all, he's going to go through David Cameron. So, you might think the Cameron years were far too long ago and have much bearing on last week's catastrophe, but the past can cast a long shadow. To begin with, Brexit. I believe that one day it will become clear to the whole nation that we were lucky to get out when we did. But that, of course, was never Cameron's intention. That ultimately, I certainly believe Brexit is ultimately going to be reversed. Absolutely, we are heading in that reversal direction. Public opinion vastly against certainly what we've ended up and the direction of where we are now. Labour is going to sort of try and improve things. They will, I think, have some successes other in some areas, some things in not. But ultimately, as I've said, we'll be heading to this direction where Labour will turn around and go, "This is Brexit. Like this is it. This is as best as it is ever going to be, but it's still going to be a massive drag on our economy, etc., etc." Do you still want to continue with this, or do you want to go back into the EU? That I still believe is our direction of travel, and that is ultimately, I think, where we are. I think heading certainly seems to be on that premise. But back to this. His miscalculations then forced him to honor a promise he didn't think he'd have to keep, and he was humiliated by the ensuing renegotiation, and he couldn't keep fellow Cameroons like Michael Gove on side for the referendum campaign. He then left behind a very divided party, not to mention a swathe of Remainery seats, including his own, that would eventually even fall to Liberal Democrats. And bear in mind, what does that tell you? That there's all these Remainery seats that fell to the Lib Dems. What does that tell you about that? Ultimately, that renegotiation, Cameron did achieve some stuff from that renegotiation. But of course, remember, if you are a pro-Brexiteer like this guy, then you have to say to this that renegotiation, he was just completely embarrassed, that he was laughed out of the room, that, you know, he came back with nothing. But Cameron did achieve some things in that. He didn't achieve lots, you know, but interestingly enough, you know, there was an article not that too long ago from, I think it was someone from Europe, who said that they should have taken his renegotiation efforts a bit more seriously. Who knows? Maybe one of the greatest what if questions of our time. Who knows? But back to this. That said, the loss of the Blue Wall isn't just about Brexit. I disagree with you on that. As Lord Ashcroft's poll shows, voters do make clear that we alienated an entire generation. Among the 25 to 34 age group, we are now in 4th place, and for that, we can blame the original sin of the last 14 years. The Cameroonian strategy of courting the grey vote at the expense of the young. Bear in mind, how are you going to sort of re-win those young people votes? This has been a constant alarm bell that a lot of conservatives have been ringing for the past couple of years, not even just recently, but going back, they have really raised that alarm bell. Now, maybe they will finally pay attention to that youth vote, but guess what? If you want that youth vote, a large swathe of that youth vote would kind of like to, you know, undo this Brexit and feel that this was unfairly put on them by an older generation that aren't going to have to live with a lot of the longer consequences that they might have to deal with. Once again, you know, our path to Europe has already been pretty much laid out for us, but there you go. Anyway, he continues this. Pensions were then boosted, but not wages. Students were then loaded with debt in return for degrees of dubious value. Again, all these people going to university, how a terrible thing. Anyway, worst of all, the dream of home ownership was now snatched away from millions. Bear in mind, was Cameron building any houses? Did he try to do any of that? Help to Buy was very, very bad. And of course, who was it that let the house inflation continue to rip after the lull of the global financial crisis? Take another bow, David Cameron and George Osborne. It was then those two who inflated the money supply with quantitative easing, who then neglected meaningful reform of the planning system, and then whose response to the crisis of affordability was to subsidize demand through economically illiterate policies such as Help to Buy. Holy moly! This guy is criticizing Help to Buy. Holy moly! Bear in mind, quantitative easing, like, what I would have loved to have known what was the alternative like to quantitative easing. Bear in mind, there were alternatives to quantitative easing. I have a suspicion what it might be, and I have a very sneaking suspicion it might be a very libertarian idea of, well, just ignore all those companies and banks going bankrupt, because that's just the market acting in a national way. Forget all the chaos, the crises, the job losses, and the economic fallout that would have happened because of that. And of course, planning reform. Well, remember, NIMBYism has been the order of the day, very, very much so, in the Conservative Party. Something Labour is also really going to have to deal with themselves. That is, let's not fool ourselves that NIMBYism isn't going to be a problem as well for many Labour MPs, but it's something they have to tackle head on if we are going to solve, our housing crisis. So back to this. But though they did pump money into a bubble economy, austerity then choked it off elsewhere. Oh, criticizing austerity. A very unusual move from a Conservative. Of course, savings had to be made in the wake of Gordon Brown. I love it. Criticizing austerity and then immediately going, well, we had to make savings because of Gordon Brown. In the wake of the Gordon Brown boom and bust, the cutting necessary capital investment is always and everywhere a false economy. Again, criticizing cutting necessary capital investment. That's a very unconservative thing to do. But again, you got to remember, this guy is a popular Conservative, and ultimately very, very much so a libertarian as well. So remember that. Eventually, though, it does prove to be rotten politics. We fought the 2024 election against a constant stream of complaints that nothing works in today's Britain. Well, there's a reason for that. It's true that Cameron held on to power for much longer than any of his four successors. But through this short-term ducking and diving, wow, blaming Cameron's short-termism. Ooh, we are getting quite spicy for a Conservative Home article, aren't we? This had very damaging and long-term consequences. Therefore, we have no hesitation in trying to give his administration the blame game rating of 4. The only reason that he doesn't get a 5th black mark is the subsequent leaders had the opportunity to try and put right his wrongs. It's not his fault, not Osborne's, that they didn't. So that's what this guy thinks to David Cameron, that he was a bit too left, that he let too many of these seats go to the Lib Dems. He criticizes and then immediately almost seems to have some sort of a take back, well, austerity was wrong, but we had to because of, that Gordon Brown. Anyway, there you go. That's his take on David Cameron. Theresa May, she gets a rating of 3. I'm going to be lenient here, not because of our second female prime minister is a good egg, but also she never stood a chance. Why did she never stand a chance? Beset on every side by bad faith actors, useful idiots, and unthinking zealots, her Brexit deal, or any conceivable alternative to it, was doomed to failure. At best, or even worst, she deserved only 1 black mark because of her part in the Brexit logjam. Here's the thing. If Theresa May had stared down, like if she had you know, if she had gone full Margaret Thatcher on these guys and really stared down the Brexit zealots and said, hey, I'm not going to go in your direction. We're going to sort of implement my Brexit trade deal because you guys have no real actual proper alternative. She could have then given a very, very large weather bell section of more of those conservatives who were sort of not really full on board with the pro-Brexit agenda, but wanted to at least remain in Europe for some of that stuff. So if she had gone full bore and really provided that almost that weather bell stuff, she maybe could have done it, but she didn't. Her biggest problem, as we've always said, Theresa May tried to compromise with both parties, and because she couldn't come to any agreement with both parties, she had to side with one or the other. And the thing is, she did neither. She constantly tried to sort of balance the two, and she didn't. She had to stare one side down or the other and go on one side, but again, she didn't. That was easily her biggest mistake. But there you go. Like I say, history again constantly will write about that period for many, many years to come. However, she gets now her further to for the ill-fated snap election. I've written about this snatching of a near defeat from the jaws of victory here, but suffice to say that there was a lot more to it than the fumbled manifesto launch. Learning the lessons of 2024 also means learning the lessons of 2017. Honestly, I'm not sure we have yet. Anyway, on the basis of all that trouble, would now have been avoided if she'd secured her majority. 3 out of 5 black marks for May. And bear in mind, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure. Let's say Theresa May somehow gets like an absolute stonking majority. Guess what? That means more Brexit ultras, more Brexit lunatics in Parliament. How on earth does she then deal with that? you know, you cannot maintain this balance. One of the reasons a lot of people think that she went for that was the hope that many of those Brexit ultras might actually lose their seats to some more, Labour or Lib Dem candidates that might be more in favour of her Brexit deal, and that she could maybe get more sort of pro her deal inside this, but also have an election on the fact that this was her deal and they could pass it. And that, maybe if she had one, maybe she might have stood up. But again, maybe ifs and buts, as I said before, big point in, British political history that will be talked about for years and years to come. Like, oh, what if Theresa May did this? What if Theresa May did that? Well, she didn't. We had the Theresa May that we got. Bear in mind, I've said this before, there's a lot of rehabilitation, I think, of Theresa May going on the past couple of years that she doesn't really deserve in many respects. But there you go. And then, of course, interestingly enough, this guy hates Johnson, giving him almost the lion's share of the blame. So let's see what he has to say about Boris Johnson. So, has any prime minister soared so high then fallen so low? If only Boris had the self-awareness to actually match his classical learning, he'd recognize himself as the Icarus of the last 14 years. To this, again, going really hard on Johnson, that's kind of interesting. But hey, there you go. At least there's a recognition of maybe we need to move away from Johnson. That's quite interesting that this almost young conservative faction is moving away from Boris Johnson. But hey, there you go. We'll see if they keep that in the future. Who knows? But to this day, he will. His very deluded defenders will still talk about that birthday cake incident as if that was all it took to bring about his downfall. They conveniently overlook the fact that Partygate is considered to be a catalogue of incidents in which a government imposed over 3 lockdowns blithely then violated its own rules. Again, at least he gets that right. And again, taking on the Johnson defenders. Can't blame him for that. Can't blame him for that at all. But it does goes to show you the difference in age, almost generational thinking between what we've seen from some people who've written their version of the what went on articles to get to this guy's. So, if every other part of Whitehall was able to prevent booze-fueled parties from breaking out on its premises, why wasn't this discipline then maintained in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office? There is simply no excuse for such a grievous insult to the suffering nation. Partygate alone, as grotesque as it was unavoidable, is enough to earn the Johnson administration 5 out of 5 black marks. At least he's being honest there about Partygate. And hey, I've always said credit where credit's due. I think Conservatives should very, very much so start, being more honest about Boris Johnson and sort of moving away from the idea and the luster of what used to be the Johnson electoral magic to the actual reality of the situation that they got. Otherwise, as you saw very recently when Boris Johnson came back to campaign for James Cleverly, of all people, I'm sure that's totally not going to come back and bite him when he stands for leader. It didn't really seem to shift the mark any too much. It seemed to be almost a last gasp of desperation, realizing that they were going to lose. Who can we possibly turn to? They actually went and smashed the Boris Johnson emergency button, something I thought they would never do, but they threatened to do, but they actually went and did it. But hey, there you go. That's totally not going to come back and haunt James Cleverly, maybe in a future leadership contest. But it does not end here. Nothing else did more damage to our election prospectors than the surge in support for Reform UK. And nothing did more to bring about that than the surge in immigration of the Johnson government. The critical Brexit promise to take back control of our borders was broken as blithely as the denizens of Downing Street broke lockdown. The situation came to a head almost last autumn when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, but it happened because of the decisions taken on Boris Johnson's watch. Who was Home Secretary during that time? you notice he's not mentioning, it's not just leaders that share really the blame. It's a lot of people in the cabinet that also share blame as well. If you really sort of want to solve the small boat problem, we've talked about it before many times, fix the asylum system, it went from 6 months under the last Labour administration to being over 2 to 3 years under the Johnson government by that point. Gee, no wonder there was such a backlog. You want to solve small boats, make a safe route, build a processing center in France. Problem solved. But of course, they can't do that because this was very, very much part of the doubling down that we saw through the Johnson years, through the Liz Truss, even into the Rishi Sunak years, of regardless of what happens, if this idea didn't work, then it wasn't the idea that was the problem. It must be something else. So, got to double down even more hard on the right ideas. So back to it. So as much of his fans on the Tory right refuse to admit it, the fact is that their hero governed as an immigration liberal. And here's the thing: we need immigration. The UK does need immigration. Immigration has been very, very good for the UK. There are other problems around immigration that do need to be solved. But blaming immigration on all the UK's ills, no. It's not not reality. This guy's even already mentioned some of the things that are, the problems of the UK. Notice he hasn't blamed it on immigration, although I'm sure in other articles this guy would do that in a heartbeat. But very strange that you'll notice he's talked about housing and etc., but didn't actually blame it on immigration. But there you go. just something worthy. I worthy, I'd say, but honestly, I think this guy, if you look back at his past writings, especially on Unheard, I can guarantee you could find an article where he blames immigration for most of the UK's ills. But there you go. Liz Truss. I'm not even going to waste more than 50 words on Liz Truss's 50 days in office. A proper conservative doesn't crash the economy. A mature conservative doesn't blame the deep state. A popular conservative doesn't lose her ultra-safe seat. 5 out of 5 black marks. Yeah, I guarantee you, if we look back through this guy's past catalogue on Unheard, guarantee you, you will see nothing but praise for Liz Truss's economic agenda. Because there were a lot of conservatives, as much as they don't want to admit it now, and especially a lot of conservative pundits that were absolutely heaping praise on Liz Truss. Remember, this guy, is very, very much an economic libertarian on these things. This is what Liz Truss wanted to do. Yeah, and she crashed the economy. This guy would probably say, oh, Liz Truss just went too fast, too quickly, and ended up crashing the economy. But probably still wants a lot of the economic reforms that Liz Truss went to do, which, ended up crashing the economy. But there you go. Anyway, and finally, of course, on to Rishi Sunak. So, after Partygate and the mini budget, Rishi Sunak's opportunities were very limited, but he managed to miss all of them. Again, interesting to see what he would actually, of what he recommends Sunak would have done. What do you mean opportunities he had? What should he have done instead? Surprisingly, actually, that's something we haven't seen yet. And I wonder if we'll get it, of what should Rishi Sunak actually done. I haven't seen that yet, but it'd be very interesting to see if someone eventually comes up with that. I wouldn't be surprised if it does come out soon. So you'd think that he might have at least learned from his predecessors and disregard the 2019 manifesto, but instead he doubled down. Just to be clear, I don't believe that Sunak set out to lose the red wall. Unlike certain fans of the cretinous ex-PMs, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But if Sunak had been on a secret mission to sabotage the 2019 realignment, he could have hardly done a better job. This is also something else we should be talking about. The whole, oh, you don't understand, there was this big realignment in 2019 and Sunak destroyed it. We've said before that the Boris Johnson 2019 coalition that he built was never, ever, ever going to last. Because as much as, many conservatives wanted to start, favoring the red wall, they would immediately turn around and they would lose support from the blue wall. And if you then started to turn around and re-support the blue wall, you'd lose support from the red wall. Boris Johnson was the only guy who was capable of maintaining that balance while actually not doing anything. If Boris Johnson had somehow managed to survive, we would still be here in the same state where Boris Johnson would have lost, and we'd all be hearing the exact same stories of why they lost and why this happened, why there was such a catastrophic loss. It would just be Boris Johnson instead of Rishi Sunak. Again, the idea that you keep Rishi Sunak you keep Boris Johnson, shall we say, and you somehow are in a different, completely situation now, is is madness. But there you go. Anyway, they continue. The continued failure to try and stop the small boats, the dismantling of the industrial policy. Again, that's of course the leveling up. But bear in mind, Rishi Sunak did that under Boris Johnson himself. So there you go. A complete total lack of vision. He was the prime minister who then leveled down, leveling up, with some very predictable consequences. Of course, probably referring to things like getting rid of HS2, completely gutting any of the leveling up money completely there. But there you go. That's worth at least 3 black marks. He gets a 4th for, of course, not stepping aside early this year when it was very abundantly clear his political strategy wasn't working. And replaced with who? Who would have been the better opportunity than Rishi Sunak? If we wind back this to the early start of the year, where there were some serious discussions about replacing Rishi Sunak, who do you replace Rishi Sunak with? Who gets his seat? The idea that you wouldn't have then descended into a full-blown conservative civil war over that argument um, is simply madness. And then you would have had to have gone to a general election almost immediately after this person had been elected. They would have lost as well, probably on another, crazy manifesto, but there you go. Anyway, he finishes off with, there was a very opportune moment after the local elections in May, but instead of making way for a new leader, he called for a general election months before he had to. It proved to be an insane gamble in more ways than one. Again, who you made way for? Who'd you elect? Who was the better option than Rishi Sunak? Who would have wanted the job, to lose? No one. You know, but praise for Peter for being honest in some of these things. You know, bravo for you for calling out all the people in your party for all the Boris Johnson stuff, the Partygate stuff. I'm almost very sure you could probably look back to find out what this guy was writing about Liz Truss's proposed mini budget at the time. I wouldn't be surprised if he was quite in support, of course, of Liz Truss. Many of the conservative commentators were. Again, who would you replace Rishi Sunak with? Who would somehow, quote, be the better option? There was no one really who was the better option, like it or not. No one would have stepped into that. Honestly, a really dull mentioning of the Cameron years, forgetting, of course, the chaos that was caused in his own party by, the Brexit referendum, the hustling, the muscling by, of course, those Brexit ultras who would then later go and cause problems for Theresa May, get under, in cabinet in many positions during Boris Johnson, implement their own crazy ideas, refusing to sort of admit, Brexit's problems itself by saying, oh, in the future, we'll be thanking, that we had left when we did. For what? What's going to happen that we'll be thanking ourselves? But again, yeah, this is honestly a really bizarre, but I think sort of an interesting take almost of what went wrong. I mean, he's sort of a bit more honest in many respects about some of the failings of those former conservative leaders, and he is right in some of that criticism. I think he misses out a ton of other criticism as well of some of those leaders, especially the kind of criticisms that we would give, of us being on the left. But there you go. Let me know what you think about this, because I think that was kind of a very interesting take by someone who is a young conservative. Definitely seems to want to have quite an influence in the next choice of leader. But we'll see. Trust me, maybe during the Conservative Civil War, Unheard will be a very interesting place indeed. But we'll see what happens. So, as always, thank you very much. Let me know what you thought to Peter's so we say ratings of the past conservative prime ministers. Do you think he was right in some of those things? Do you think he was wrong? Do mention some of the stuff that he mentioned out, of those leaders. But hey, there you go. Like I say, as I've said before, conservatives are not going to be completely honest with themselves about their, their 14 years of failure in power. But there you go. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.